Now our study today, friends, brings us back here into the first chapter of Philippians, and we're putting in at verse 14. I hope many of you have the notes and outlines. If not, we have a set here for you. There's no charge for that. The books that we offer, there is a charge for that. That is, we ask people to send in a gift for the radio. And we believe that that's fair and proper because we depend upon the gifts of listeners to continue this program. Last time, we noticed that Paul said that the things that had happened to him had happened for the furtherance of the gospel rather than the hindrance of the gospel. Because I'm sure that when Epaphroditus brought this letter and gift from the Philippians, it was a note of deep sympathy and love for Paul, and they were distressed that the gospel apparently was not going out. That was their conclusion, that since Paul was in prison. Now, Paul says, instead of it being hindered, actually it's going to the exact places that the Lord said it would go to. He said, I'm in prison in Rome, but there's chained to me, and that was the method. Every day there'd be a changing of the guard, and a new man would be chained to the Apostle Paul. And they let him do that rather than put him in prison. He was in his own hired house. And I would say that the surroundings at that time were not too uncomfortable because, after all, this man chained to him is a member of the Praetorian Guard, and that meant he was a patrician. He belonged to the upper class in Rome. Only Italians belonged to it. Now, Paul has chained to him for several hours each day a member of the royalty. What do you think Paul talked about? I imagine they talked about the weather. Probably the man asked him about what the charge was against him, and probably asked him about what conditions were over in the east. How was it in Asia? He'd heard about it, and probably as a soldier he would be sent out to that area. However, very few of these guards ever left the Roman area. And Paul now ministers to him. Paul is able to say to this man, I have something to tell you. I'm in bonds because of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So that now, as the Lord had said it first, he had said, this man, Saul of Tarsus, will appear before kings and rulers. Well, he's made it now. He's appearing before them. And therefore, it was falling out. And then there was something else here. Notice verse 14. And many of the brethren in the Lord, waxing confident by my bonds, are much more bold to speak the word without fear. And you see that in the church, there were many men who would love to have gone out as witnesses. Fact of the matter is, they would have. But having heard the Apostle Paul, and I think Paul, though not very impressive to look at, I think to hear him would have been very impressive. And he spoke in the power of the Spirit. And I'm sure that many folks said, well, look, Paul is out going up and down Roman roads preaching the gospel, and he does it so much more effectively than I can do it, so I'll not be going out. He felt like, as many folk feel today, I'm not worthy, I'm not competent, I'm not trained. And as a result, why, there were not many going up and down preaching the gospel. Now, word goes out to the churches in the Roman Empire that Paul the Apostle is at Rome in prison, and he can no longer go out as a witness for Jesus Christ. I am confident that literally at this time, hundreds of men, maybe thousands, hit the Roman roads. They hit the pavement, and they started out as a full-of-brush man would today, or Avon calling or something like that. They really moved out and went even from Doa to Doa and began to witness for Christ. And Paul says here, very frankly, many of the brethren in the Lord waxing confident by my bonds. They say, Paul can't go, I'll go. And many went out. So Paul can sit there in prison and say, well, I was out by myself with, of course, a few others, But now, literally, there are hundreds and maybe even thousands out preaching the gospel. He's being multiplied. So he says, what's happened to me has happened for the furtherance of the gospel. Now, I want to add a third reason. Paul doesn't mention it, but it certainly is true. And it is this, that we can only get this from the perspective of history. I'm sure Paul at that day, he may or may not have thought of it. He could have. But he certainly doesn't mention it. And it is this, that you and I today have 4 prison epistles that are the very choice epistles. Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, Philemon, all marvelous. And we wouldn't have them if Paul hadn't been in prison. I'm sure the Lord might have worked out some other way, but this just happened to be the way he did it. So all of these are the reasons that it's happened for the furtherance of the gospel.